The forest was quiet, too quiet for wartime Germany. No trucks on the road, no guards shouting orders, no clang of hammers or sirens. Only the soft rustle of pine needles under a dull winter wind. Yet beneath that silence, beneath the frozen soil itself, machines screamed. It was 1944. Germany was bleeding on every front. The Allied bombers came like steel locusts, blotting out the sky over the Ruhr, Hamburg, and Munich. Factories burned, rail lines twisted, and fuel depots vanished in smoke. But still, the Reich needed bombs, thousands of them, to slow the inevitable. And so, deep in Thuringia, the Germans built something almost mythical, a ghost village hiding a war factory beneath its cobblestones. At first glance, it was nothing. A quiet hamlet tucked among dark fir trees and rolling hills. A church steeple leaned gently toward the sky, smoke curled from chimneys, and laundry flapped on clotheslines. Children's toys lay scattered in yards. There were even chickens pecking in the mud. But the laughter, the movement, the life was all illusion. The villagers were carefully chosen factory workers in plain clothes, told to live as peasants. The houses were facades, built from wood and plaster, their windows painted with soot to mimic glass. And beneath them, through trapdoors hidden under rugs and cellars, spiral staircases led down into a different world, one built entirely for war. Below ground stretched a labyrinth, concrete tunnels lined with cables and rails, echoing with the hiss of air compressors and the rhythm of conveyor belts. Here, engineers and slave laborers worked in shifts that never ended. The air was thick with oil and the sting of nitric acid, the smell of death disguised as industry. The project was codenamed Walsenheim by some, Project Dorf by others, but its true name was known only to the few officers who reported directly to Speer's armaments ministry. Its purpose, to mass-produce the new generation of aerial bombs, sleek, deadly, and precise enough to pierce Allied armor. Each morning above ground, life played out like theater. Bread was baked, doors were swept, bells rang. Allied reconnaissance planes would pass overhead, cameras whirring. From above, the village looked entirely harmless. Smoke from chimneys, people in fields, nothing but a quiet pocket of countryside. And so the planes moved on. Beneath that calm, the factory pulsed like a mechanical heart. The workers were under oath and under watch. A misstep meant disappearance, no questions asked. Even the engineers, men of science and precision, had begun to speak in whispers. Some said the tunnels reached 6 stories deep. Others swore they heard trains moving far below, bringing ore from mines unknown. One of them, an engineer named Friedrich Bauer, kept a small notebook hidden behind a loose brick near his workbench. In it, he drew maps, sketches of the ventilation systems, the wiring routes, the loading docks. Not for pride, not for curiosity, but for memory. Because he had seen what happened in the camps not far away, and he knew that one day, someone would need to understand what they built here and why. Bauer had been a structural engineer before the war, a quiet man who designed bridges and schools. Now his designs were used to conceal destruction. Every day he descended into the tunnels, he told himself that if he built them strong enough, maybe fewer men would die under the constant bombardment above. It was a fragile logic, but in war, logic often becomes survival. The Allied intelligence services, meanwhile, had grown suspicious. Something about the railway shipments didn't add up. Trains left Gotha carrying tons of machinery and explosives, yet few deliveries were ever recorded. British aerial analysts pored over photographs of the Thuringian woods, trying to spot signs of industry, vent shafts, new roads, fresh scars of construction. But nothing fit. The photos showed only a village, a perfect, ordinary village. Until one day in late December 1944, when a young reconnaissance pilot flying at dawn noticed something strange. The shadows of the houses did not match the angle of the sun. Some were too short, others too long. A few pointed in directions that defied geometry. He reported it. His superiors laughed. "Shadows don't win wars," they said. But the intelligence officer assigned to the case, a man named Captain Henry Weston, didn't laugh. He had seen something similar near Peenemünde 2 years earlier, before the V2 rocket sites were discovered. Shadows had been the clue then too. Weston ordered a new round of photos, this time at different times of day. The results were astonishing. The village changed shape under different light. Roofs shifted, walls seemed to blur. The illusion, once seen, couldn't be unseen. By February 1945, a joint RAF-USAF team had pieced together a mosaic of images. Beneath the innocent roofs, there were faint outlines of air vents and elevator shafts, and nearby, barely visible, rail spurs disappearing into the forest. The analysts didn't know what was under there, but they knew it wasn't just houses. Meanwhile, underground, Bauer's world was beginning to collapse. Allied bombing raids had pushed the German supply lines to breaking point. The workers were starving, exhausted, terrified. The air grew heavy with soot and rumors. Some whispered that the SS planned to seal the tunnels entirely if the Allies advanced too close, trapping everyone inside. Bauer couldn't sleep. Each night he sat by the tiny oil lamp in his section, sketching maps in his notebook. Not for himself, but for whoever might find them one day. He knew what they were building down there would not survive the war, but the truth might. Then came the sound that changed everything, the distant thunder of artillery, rolling through the earth like the growl of something waking. The front was moving closer. Orders came down to accelerate production. Day shifts became day and night shifts. The tunnels vibrated with urgency and fear. Yet above ground, the village still played its part. Children walking to non-existent schools, women hanging clothes that would never dry, men pretending to fix fences that had no purpose. On March 3, 1945, an Allied bomber formation crossed the Thuringian sky, heading east toward Leipzig. No one paid attention to the little village below. No one had orders to. But Weston, from a cramped intelligence office in London, was already arguing otherwise. He believed the fake village was one of the Reich's last major production sites, a heart still beating after the body had died. "If we don't strike it," he told his commander, "we may be fighting its bombs on the battlefield in April." The decision came 2 weeks later. Operation Glass Curtain, a single strike, targeted precisely on the coordinates of the Shadow Village. Weston didn't know what lay beneath. He only knew it had to end. That night, as the bombers lifted into the air, the German workers underground heard the tremor before the sirens. The earth shook slightly, then settled again, as if bracing itself. In the tunnels, Bauer gripped his notebook and looked upward. For the first time in months, he heard nothing. No machines, no orders, no footsteps. Only silence. And in that silence, he understood. The war, above and below, was reaching its final act. He tucked the notebook into a steel pipe and sealed it with melted wax. The last line he wrote, in trembling pencil, read, "If someone finds this, know that not all who built this wanted it to exist." Outside, the sky was already glowing red. The first explosions tore the air apart. They came not as thunder, but as a pulse deep, concussive, and endless. The earth convulsed beneath the fake village, ripping through its hollow streets. Plaster walls crumbled inward, roofs folded like paper, and the chimneys that had fooled Allied eyes for months fell in perfect, silent sequence. Above ground, fire devoured illusion. Below, it found truth. The bombs penetrated the camouflage, punching through the wooden shells, through the soil packed above the tunnels, through steel and concrete. One after another, they fell into the belly of the underground factory, the heart of Project Dorf. Inside, the workers ran. Sirens wailed through the corridors, but there was nowhere to go. The exits had been sealed days earlier by SS guards under orders to prevent desertion. The only stairways led upward, to doors now buried in fire and stone. Bauer staggered through the smoke, the air thick with concrete dust and screaming. The tunnels that had once hummed with mechanical rhythm now echoed with chaos. Cables snapped and hissed like snakes, steam pipes burst, and lights flickered before dying altogether. In that darkness, men shouted names that vanished before reaching their own ears. A section of ceiling collapsed ahead of him, sending a rain of fire and gravel. Bauer threw himself to the ground, coughing, tasting grit and iron. The sound was everywhere, not a roar but a deep groaning, as if the mountain itself was suffocating. He crawled toward the eastern shaft, where the ventilation tunnels met the supply rail. There, through smoke and debris, he could see a sliver of air. Cold, night air, sharp with the scent of burning wood. The surface was breaking apart. The village above was gone. He felt no victory, no relief. Only the terrible awareness that everything built here, every lie, every calculation, every secret, was ending the same way it began, buried under its own design. When the first shockwave passed, Bauer stumbled into a collapsed chamber where dozens of workers lay crushed or gasping. One of them, a young man from Prague named Jan, still clutched a wrench like a weapon. His eyes met Bauer's, full of disbelief and fury. "Why didn't they warn us?" Jan rasped. Bauer had no answer, perhaps because the truth itself had been a weapon, and weapons, he now knew, consume everyone who holds them. He pulled Jan free from the rubble, dragging him toward the side passage that led to the northern shaft. Behind them, the ground kept shaking. Dust fell like snow. Somewhere in the maze of tunnels, a generator caught fire, sending a blue flame racing along the fuel lines. The light followed them, faster than footsteps. Bauer found a maintenance hatch, one of the few he himself had designed. It led to a narrow escape duct used for air pressure testing. He forced it open, shoving Jan ahead. The two crawled through the suffocating dark, the metal walls radiating heat. When they emerged, they were outside, or what was left of outside. The village had become a cratered wasteland. The fake church was gone, its bell half melted in the dirt. The fields that had once fooled Allied eyes were now a patchwork of fire. The night sky flickered orange, and snow fell, grey with ash. Jan fell to his knees. "So this is what truth looks like," he whispered. Bauer didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the last bomber formation vanished into cloud, their engines fading into the kind of silence that follows confession. He thought of the notebook he had hidden, still sealed inside the tunnels. Maybe it would survive. Maybe someone would find it. Maybe it would matter. Or maybe, like so much else, it would vanish into the anonymity of war. They walked for hours, avoiding the main roads. Bauer's uniform was gone. His papers, burned. By dawn, they reached a stretch of forest near Ordruf. The cold gnawed at their bones, but the air was free. For the first time in months, Bauer could smell pine, soil, the living earth untainted by oil or acid. But freedom, like silence, can be cruel. By afternoon, SS patrols found the survivors wandering the woods. Bauer and Jan were arrested along with a handful of others. They were accused of sabotage, for surviving what they were meant to die in. In a dim interrogation room, an officer demanded to know how Bauer had escaped. He said nothing. They beat him. He still said nothing. When they threatened to execute Jan, Bauer finally spoke, not to confess, but to plead. He claimed responsibility for the escape hatch, said it had been his engineering error. The officer smiled, as if amused by the idea that one man's mercy could be mistaken for incompetence. 2 days later, Bauer was loaded onto a truck headed toward Buchenwald. Jan never saw him again. But the Allies did. By early April, the 3rd U.S. Army reached Thuringia. Recon units stumbled upon what they first thought was a bombed-out hamlet. When they descended through the wreckage, they found tunnels. Endless tunnels. Inside lay the remains of one of the most elaborate underground armament facilities of the war. The walls were fused from heat. Steel beams had melted into stone. Amid the wreckage, they found signs of the life once staged above. Children's shoes, artificial flowers, broken porcelain marked "Made in Thuringia." It was a theater of deception, burned to its foundations. But near one wall, sealed in a rusted pipe, they found a small notebook. The ink had run, but some sketches were legible. Ventilation systems, conveyor routes, notes written in careful script, and at the end, that line, "If someone finds this, know that not all who built this wanted it to exist." Captain Henry Weston was there that day. He stood in the wrecked chamber, the light of his torch playing over the torn pages. He didn't know who Bauer was, but he felt something in those words, something that outlasted sides or uniforms. He ordered the notebook preserved and the tunnels photographed before they were sealed forever. When Weston returned to England, he carried that notebook in his pack. Years later, when he lectured at the Imperial War College, he would sometimes open it during his talks on deception and strategy. But he never read aloud from it. Instead, he'd pause, close it gently, and say, "Sometimes the truth is not in what we destroy, but in what we leave buried." Outside, the war was ending. The Reich had collapsed, Berlin burned, and the world moved on. But beneath the forests of Thuringia, where the snow still falls on silent hills, the earth holds its secrets. Even now, if you walk those woods in winter, you can still find fragments of that fake village. A shattered brick here, a rusted pipe there, and the faint trace of a road that leads nowhere. The wind moves through the pines, whispering over the ruins, and if you listen closely, it sounds almost like breath. The breath of a place that was never alive and yet remembers. Spring came late to Thuringia that year. The war was over, but the air still carried the scent of smoke and iron, a ghost that refused to leave. The forests grew back slowly, moss spreading over the craters where the fake village once stood. Grass crept over the ruins, softening the outlines of deceit. The birds returned before the people did. The tunnels beneath the earth were sealed with concrete, their entrances collapsed by Allied engineers. Yet even as they buried them, they could feel something sacred in the silence, as if they were entombing not just machinery, but a question. How could such brilliance serve such darkness? How could men of skill and reason create something so precise, only to hide death beneath the mask of life? Captain Henry Weston thought about that question for the rest of his life. In 1946, during the first post-war trials, he was called to testify about the discovery of Project Dorf. The courtroom in Nuremberg was heavy with heat, the air filled with the hum of translators and the rustle of papers. Weston sat behind the microphone, his hands steady, his voice clear. He described the village, the underground labyrinth, and the notebook, the small human artifact that made the entire machine of war feel painfully intimate. The judges listened, impassive. But when Weston read the final line aloud, "Not all who built this wanted it to exist," the room changed. It was as though a window had opened in a sealed chamber. For a moment, the architecture of guilt and defense fell silent, and something older than justice entered the room: understanding. That notebook, fragile and water-stained, became evidence, not of a crime, but of conscience. It was sent to London for preservation, then locked away in an archive. For decades, it gathered dust. And yet stories have a way of surviving what history forgets. In 1963, a young German historian named Anna Bauer, granddaughter of Friedrich, found the notebook while researching wartime engineering projects. She had grown up hearing only fragments. Her grandfather vanished at the end of the war, last seen near Ochterdruf. No one knew what happened after. Her father, born after his disappearance, kept a faded photograph. A man in a wool coat, standing in snow, his eyes both proud and sad. When Anna touched the notebook, the paper flaked at her fingertips, but the handwriting was still his. The sketches were unmistakable, every line drawn with precision, the angles exact, the notes meticulous. The same hand that once built tunnels for death had also mapped a path for truth. She spent years piecing together the story, walking through the forests of Thuringia where her grandfather had worked. The ground was uneven, but she could still trace the outline of streets, phantom roads leading to nowhere. She found rusted pipes protruding from the soil, fragments of machinery, the remains of false walls. Locals called it Das Totendorf, the dead village. Most avoided it. Some swore they heard faint echoes at night, the rumble of machinery deep beneath the earth, though the tunnels had long since been sealed. Anna didn't believe in ghosts. But she did believe in memory, and memory, she knew, is its own haunting. She published her research in 1972, a quiet book read mostly by scholars. Yet within its pages, the story of Project Dorf became more than a footnote of deception. It became a mirror. It forced readers to confront the complexity of those who lived under tyranny, that some built the machine out of fear, some out of duty, and a few, like Bauer, out of a desperate hope that their knowledge might one day expose the lie itself. By then, Henry Weston was an old man. He lived in Sussex, his uniform long retired, his medals tucked away. When Anna's book reached him, he read it in one sitting, his hands trembling with recognition. He wrote her a letter, short, formal, but heartfelt. I found your grandfather's words in the ruins. I carried them through war and through years of peace that never quite felt peaceful. He gave me something I never thanked him for, proof that even in darkness, the smallest act of conscience can survive. Anna visited him that autumn. They spoke for hours in his garden, under the soft grey light of England. He showed her the original notebook, carefully preserved, its edges frayed but intact. Together, they read it aloud, page by page. By the time they reached the end, neither could speak. When Weston died 2 years later, he left the notebook to her, along with a single line written in his will. Some truths are not meant to be buried twice. Anna returned to Thuringia one final time. She stood where the village had once stood, where fake houses had hidden furnaces, where silence had masked suffering. The forest around her was quiet now, the air clean and cold. She placed the notebook on the earth beneath a young oak and covered it gently with soil, not to hide it, but to return it. For her, it was not an act of burial. It was an act of balance. Today, little remains of Project Dorf. The forest has reclaimed the ground, roots threading through what was once concrete and wire. Hikers sometimes stumble upon fragments of brick or glass and wonder what stood there. A few historians know, but even they admit, the full map of the tunnels is lost. Perhaps it's better that way, because what matters isn't the machinery, the bombs, or even the lies. What matters is that, in the heart of the Reich's deception, one man left behind proof of his humanity. A whisper carved into the bones of the earth. And if you stand there at dusk, when the wind moves low through the trees, you can almost hear it still. The quiet hum of machines that no longer exist, the echo of footsteps through corridors that were never meant to see daylight, and beneath it all, a single human heartbeat. Faint, defiant, and unbroken. A reminder that even under the weight of history's darkest stone, truth finds a way to breathe.